Any views or opinions expressed on KUR are not necessarily those of Kutztown University, Kutztown University Student Government, Kutztown University Student Services Incorporated, KUR staff and management, or other affiliated organizations.
Welcome to Emmy Knows, interviewing people of interest to the KU campus community. And now, your host of Emmy Knows, Emmeline.
You're listening to the radio voice of Kutztown University, KUR. My name is Emmeline, and this is Emmy Knows, a weekly get-to-know you featuring the people who help make KU great. In the studio with me today is Dr. Kevin Mahoney, a professor of English and the founder and editor of Raging Chicken Press. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, it's awesome. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. So you are actually the first professor that I've hosted on my show.
See that? So was that that disclaimer about the opinions, is that specifically for me today, or is that?
No, we do air it every episode, but
Well, I'm glad to be a first. There you go.
But yeah, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. I'm so excited. I wanted to invite you actually last semester, but I just sort of the semester got away from me.
Yeah,
you know how it goes.
Well, it was good. It did for me too as well. But it's actually great to be back in the studio. I was over the studio once before. I love radio so much, and I just love what KUR does. So this feels like a bit of a homecoming here today. So
oh my gosh, that's so exciting. So like I was telling you earlier, I stalk my guests online. I definitely stalked your LinkedIn, but I also stalked the Kutztown English website, and your bio is very short and straight to the point. Professor, English department. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that description and what your focus is as an English professor at Kutztown.
Sure. Well, that's a little story in of itself, just about the bio, just because all the websites got completely redone, and so all of our old bios and everything just got deleted. So, but yeah, sure. I've been here since 2002, and my field is actually in composition and rhetoric. So I'm not the literature person, I'm not the journalist person, and for probably about half of my career here, I really wasn't part of any one of the majors per se. We were actually building a program in composition and rhetoric, which is kind of the study of language and literacy, the teaching of writing, and looking at the kind of connections between kind of rhetoric and broader issues. And so my focus has been specifically the connections between rhetoric, democracy, and social movements.
Okay.
Now, for years, I also teach, first year composition, and now it's a two-tiered thing. So I was the director of the or coordinator of the composition program for several years here. Yeah, until I was able to hand that off to my first hire. Right, was Amy Lynch-Biniak, who is now the composition coordinator, who's also awesome. And she took over for me after I had done it for about 6-7 years, and try to build that program. But like everything else, the program didn't end up materializing because of budget constraints, and there's a long story associated with that too as well. But my focus in my courses and in my research has always been looking at how everyday people, how social movements use kind of language and media, right, for purposes of advocacy, for purpose of furthering democracy and deepening democracy. So that's the short of it. And now recently, I'm also now as one of the original members of developing a new major in social media theory and strategy.
That is my major.
There you go.
Yeah.
That started Claire Van Ens, who she's retired now, but she was the chair of the communications department, and noticed that a lot of us in English and folks in communications and people in what was then electronic media were developing courses in digital rhetorics and digital media. And she said, you know what, why don't we all get in the same room and think about building something? And so, that was a while ago, but now, so I teach writing for social media as part of that, and most of my classes on, say, activist writing media and so on are also part of that major as electives.
That's so cool. So you just sort of mentioned democracy, rhetoric, etc. Like I said, I stalked you on LinkedIn. I know you went to Syracuse.
I did.
And you majored in political science there as an undergrad, and then you did your English master's. Can you talk a little bit about you as an undergrad, and did you always know you wanted to teach, or did you sort of start with a different goal in mind?
No, I started I went to college for two reasons, right? To begin with, one, I felt like I needed to get out of my town.
Okay.
I mean, I grew up in a Rust Belt, dying industrial town, and it always felt really kind of constraining. And I feel even kind of bad even saying that. Utica, New York is my hometown because there's a lot about that town which I love. But I knew I wanted to get out, and I love ideas. I loved arguments. I love philosophy, and I felt I need to find some place where I can do that. But I had no idea what I wanted to major in. I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew was I wanted to go to a place where I could talk about ideas and think about this stuff and meet other people who wanted to do the same thing.
Sure.
And so I went through about 5 majors within my first 2 years at Syracuse. And it was my connection with other activists, because I'd been involved with activism and punk rock for all through high school and everything. And met up a bunch of other folks who were interested in political activism, both on campus, in some solidarity work with Central American refugees, and those discussions kind of led me to take more classes in political science, and particularly those study of social movements and so on. And that's what led me to political science. When I got into political science, I knew I wanted to go on. But frankly, my advisors at the time were saying, "Look, check this program out. Look at this program," and all of it was very quantitative, right? Analysis. And as a reader, I love quantitative stuff, but that is not my kind of lane, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah.
So I ended up, taking some time off to figure out where I could go, and I worked in a union job at the university. My undergrad, I worked at the Carrier Dome pretty much full time. It's a sporting arena at Syracuse University, and then I got a union job in the Carrier Dome, which allowed me to take courses for free.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it was part of our contract, and I said, well, I knew a lot of my friends were in English departments, and I had taken some class in English, and English at the time at Syracuse was in the midst of this kind of really kind of disciplinary explosion where we're challenging the canons of literature and so on. So bringing in all sorts of divergent voices, thinking about literature in much more broad senses. And it felt to me like a lot of the political theory that I was studying in political science, we were doing in English. So I decided to take a couple classes, and then eventually got accepted to the program after I loved it and studied kind of critical theory as a master's student. And then finally ended up in composition rhetoric after I had an assistantship that put me in the classroom to teach first-year writing with no training, no background, everything like this, like they do a lot of graduate students. And I thought composition rhetoric was fascinating to me because, one, it was hard, and it wasn't just about talking about theory and having students kind of remember the theory, but you had to think about what does this mean in terms of the specifics of writing, of how do you make a case that's effective and compelling. And those were challenges that I had never thought of before. And as someone who had always struggled with writing myself, I think that was part of what got me interested in it. It's like writing never came natural to me. To this day, I suck as a spelling, But that was the kind of the nexus. And I always found that in a community of people that were interested in the study of writing and composition rhetoric, I ended up kind of connecting with too as well. So that's the kind of as compact of academic journey I can give you.
So then you went to Miami for your
Correct.
PhD,
Yep.
and then somehow you ended up in Kutztown, Pennsylvania.
Well, I'll tell you how. So when I was in Miami, and when I finished my coursework at Miami, so you're doing your PhD, right? You do all your coursework, and you finish all your coursework, and then you have to write a dissertation.
Sure.
And so you have hours that are specifically for dissertation writing. So when I got done with my coursework, I ended up moving to Washington, D.C.
Okay.
Right. And I was away from my committee, right? So I was doing everything, via email and stuff like this. At that time, it was the explosion of the World Trade Organization protest, like what was kind of like the rise of the global justice movement in Seattle. And frankly, as someone who'd been involved with activism for a long time, it took me by surprise. I had no idea where this came. I didn't know what the WTO was, and so I dove into what this was. I'm like, oh my God, there's like a birth of a social movement that is happening right here, right now. I didn't know about it. I need to find out about it. And there was an amazing community in Washington, D.C. that was organizing for a follow-up demonstration in the spring called A16 against the IMF and the World Bank. And so I jumped in with those folks. So in the midst of that, I started, again, shifting my dissertation, getting involved with more folks that were doing work in social movements in Washington, D.C. And I was looking for ways of gaining experience in some of the organizations that were organizing. My parents were union members and teachers. My dad was a union organizer, and so I thought, it'd be kind of cool to see if I can get an internship or do some work for a union. And I got an internship at American Federation of Teachers in their national office, in Washington, D.C., over the summer, and I got to do work in their higher education office. I swear to God, there's a point to this story that leads to your question.
I'm enjoying it.
But what happened, so in that higher education office, they brought me on to do research about updating this report. The report was called The Vanishing Professor.
Oh.
Yeah, exactly. It was a murder mystery. No, it was about the gradual decline in tenured and tenure-track faculty member and the kind of rise of part-time contingent faculty members and adjunct faculty who were being paid by the class, often at starvation wages with no benefits, no job security, and so on. And part of my job in updating this report was to call around to all the unions or faculty organizations around the country that were mentioned in the previous report, and look for updates in their contract language, new challenges that they were facing, and so on. So it was kind of cool. I got to talk to, faculty members who were like at, the Berklee School of Music in Boston, and I didn't even know there was a school called Berklee in Boston, at the time, but and got to talk to folks all over the country, and it seemed just about like every third person I talked to said, "Well, have you seen the ABSCUF contract?" I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know what ABSCUF is, and they're like, "Look, it's a union in Pennsylvania." And they've got the gold standard when it comes to protections of part-time faculty rights. I said, okay. So I researched it, saw ABSCUF, researched their contract, and sure enough, it was the best language that I had seen, and so I was kind of writing about this stuff. As part of that process, that was my first introduction to the Pennsylvania state system of higher education, right?
Sure.
I think, like for most people outside of Pennsylvania, when you hear Pennsylvania state system, you think Penn State.
Yeah.
Right. So I was completely unaware that there was another kind of layer of it, and I said, oh, it's like New York. In New York, we have the SUNY system, right? And you have the research tier, then you've got, so it made sense. And when I was finally finishing my dissertation and I was applying for jobs, I saw Kutztown University, and I saw Westchester University. Both came up with positions at that time, and I had known them from the ABSCUF contract. I had also been involved with a union organizing campaign for part-time faculty and graduate teaching assistants at George Washington University, where I was an adjunct during that time in D.C. And I knew after living that life for a little bit how important it was to be at a place where you had protections of your academic freedom, protections over your job, and gave you and kind of took away the kind of veil of fear about speaking out about problems that are existing.
Sure.
So I wanted to be at a union campus. And so I applied to Kutztown. I applied to Westchester. One of my best friends got the job at Westchester. I got the job here.
Okay, cool.
And I had the opportunity to stay in D.C. They offered me a job at GW that would have been a lower course load, would have been more money, right? I love D.C. I had great friends there. But when I came to campus here, what made my decision was that Janice Chernikoff, who's now in the assistant dean right now, was the chair of the English department for a while. She'd walk me around campus, and as we were walking around campus, she'd talk and stop and talk to students, and she knew those students, right? And when I talked to students, they raved about kind of like the faculty or kind of why they came to Kutztown.
Sure.
And I saw a lot of the students who attended Kutztown University reminded me of my neighborhood, right? The GW, nothing against GW, I've got some good friends down there, but a lot of the students were ambassadors' kids, right? International finance kids,
Sure.
right? They were not my neighborhood. So all that came together, and I said, okay, this is where I'm going to come. And I figured that this would be a place where I could help build programs. I could, get involved with the faculty union, which I've been since I first got here, and work with students who, in some ways, I've always wanted to do that. Like in some way, kind of give back to the same kind of communities in which I grew up in.
Sure.
And so all those things kind of came together and put me here.
Mm-hmm. That's so awesome. Like, that's so, I love that. I love hearing, like, how people sort of, came up in the world. And now you're like, oh, I'm the professor of English.
Yeah, except I got no patches on my arms.
But something that you just sort of mentioned, being protected from, like, if you wanted to speak out,
Yep.
sort of brings me into our next topic about Raging Chicken Press.
Mm-hmm.
So the short description that I got from Facebook is that it is a left/progressive media site devoted to covering and helping build on-the-ground activism and communities of resistance, and it was founded in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about how it came into being
Yep.
and how the university sort of ties into it?
Sure. Well, the only direct tie, we'll start there. The only direct tie with Kutztown is the name.
Sure.
Right? I mean, when I was founding Raging Chicken, I knew I wanted to I'll get to that story in a second, but I wanted something that was locally and regionally based, and something that would signify not like national politics only, but really focused on what was happening in our communities and in our state. And one of the first things I was introduced to when I came to Kutztown as part of a new faculty member was the clock tower in Old Main.
Sure.
Right? And say, like, if you look at it from the side, it's an angry chicken. And so I was like, okay, well, let's ratchet that up a notch and make it a raging one, and
Sure.
we'll call it that. But Raging Chicken came out of a couple things. In 2010, there was a huge Tea Party victory in the midterm elections nationwide, which ushered in kind of a group of kind of really radical kind of right-wing legislators, both not just our state but kind of nationwide. And at the beginning of 2011 in Wisconsin, the governor and the legislators started passing a whole series of bills that were stripping union rights, that were taking away medical care for some of the most precarious kind of individuals, that were gutting public higher education system and so on. And within very short order, that's almost identical legislation began to appear in Ohio, in Indiana, in Idaho. And it became pretty clear that, okay, this is not just like a one and done. This is part of a plan, right?
Sure.
And now only afterwards do we realize that this was part of a deeply funded network from, say, the Koch brothers and lots of other kind of dark money groups. So at the time, I was my wife and I were expecting our second kid. My Girl Scout, right? Rowan was just at 3, I think, or 2 at that point. I had the experience from our son, knowing that what kind of time that was going to take,
Sure.
which I was completely oblivious to the first time round, and I hit the ground hard. But I felt like I had to do something, and I had done developed zines and blogs. I had done blogging work. A friend of mine and I had won a grant to study the use of blogs in the composition classroom before. And so I thought, okay, this is something I can do in the time that I could do it. And so I figured, okay, there is no progressive media infrastructure in the state of Pennsylvania. And I said, well, how about if we try to build this from the ground up?
Sure.
And so that was the birth of Raging Chicken, was to say, how do we begin to highlight the work that is happening on the ground in our communities by, what I say, communities of resistance, people who are actively trying to take control, right, over their lives, over their governments, over their kind of local city councils, and put people first. And that's kind of really what has been the genesis of that. And now since then, we also have a weekly podcast called Out the Coop Podcast, which we talk about national and state news, and we also talk about, like whatever, just random stuff in our last call section too.
Sure.
Like I do space news because I'm a space geek and things like that,
I love that. Haven't you talked about like Star Trek in class before? I feel like
Yep.
you have, because I'm a big Trekkie myself, so I love that. To move topics a little bit, but
Yeah.
still sort of be related to that, yesterday you were telling me about this project you're currently involved with, and it's called the Healthy Campus Bill of Rights.
Correct.
So could you talk a little bit about what this is and how it came about?
Sure. So the Healthy Campus Bill of Rights came about after faculty members, like I live in Lytle Hall. Lytle Hall has had persistent kind of mold problems ever since I've been here. There's other kind of building related issues that have happened across campus. Students have had issues, like there was a bed bug explosion that got reported on in the Keystone.
Oh my.
Like last year and a couple of years before that. And I've had, there's been kind of abuses that have been reported that I've reported on Raging Chicken when it comes to facilities workers. So there's been a lot of different groups on campus that have been trying to kind of address things that are negatively affecting our experience at the university. And we got just discussing and said, well, what would it look like if we started talking about this together? Right. What is it that we're what are the common themes here? And that's what came out of that was this idea of a healthy campus bill of rights. And when we say healthy campus, we don't mean just like, make sure that, you get cough medicine, right?
Sure.
So there's like a 3-tier thing. And the idea is that the Healthy Campus Bill of Rights says we have the right to, by virtue of being a member of this community, a healthy working and learning environment, and that includes like buildings that are free from mold and harmful contaminants, a culture free from abusive and toxic power relationships, whether it be sexism or discrimination based upon race or ethnicity or national origin, that students and faculty and staff empowered to report abuse of unhealthy conditions without fear of reprisals, open communication, and so on. Accessible health center, adequately staffed counseling center, right, on campus. So a range of issues that are related to what we would kind of see as health, but then also a campus investment, a kind of forward investment in kind of the financial health of our community. We know that, for example, more and more students are strapped down by student debt, right, and that is having a determinant effect on what they can do in the future, right. And so we think there's proposals right now in the state legislature for free college tuition in the state of Pennsylvania called the PA Promise. We think our university administration, our statewide administration should be part and parcel in a partnership in advocating for that. Right. So that's the kind of thing. We should also think that all workers on campus should have a living wage, right? Whether it's you're working if you're a food service worker, if you're a student worker, right, or if you're working in facilities, right? That should be the baseline. We should have 12-month healthcare coverage, right, by nature of being part of this university. And then finally, when we start looking at what do we need to make sure that this is a community that can be sustained as what the university likes to call a caring community, but we see like a healthy community of the future, we need to kind of address the climate crisis straight on. And so we believe that, as part of that healthy is a campus infrastructure that is prepared to meet the climate crisis as it is. And that means like an actionable plan to actually transition off fossil fuels by 2030, right? And so this is ambitious, we get it, right? But that's the whole idea, right? The university routinely puts together strategic plans when it comes to the planning that comes from the administrative office. We started thinking about this as our strategic plan, right? What would it look like if students and faculty and staff begin to articulate the kind of community that we think we want, right? And then what if we start putting together plans about how to get there, right? And so then we've actually got real choices. Instead of just being worried, constantly hearing the fact that we have no money, there's nothing we can do, what if we started saying, well, this is what we want, and this is how we prepare to get it.
That's like very succinct and very like, okay, yeah, you say you don't have this, but here's our ideas.
Well, here's our idea, and then it's a group of people that are willing to like fight for it.
Yeah.
That we can, as a community, we can lobby our legislators. As a community, we can say, no, we don't want this program over here cut. We think we should do something else. Yes, we have. We don't think students should be kind of inflicted with all these student fees left and right. So we should find a ton of ways of doing this. Instead of shipping our food, for example, from like across the country, we should actually locally source a bunch of our food that is actually giving directly back to our community. Right? There's lots that we can do if we start kind of using the creative energies of students and faculty and staff to think about what is it that we want, not is it what will we accept, right? And so, we launched a petition drive this past week, and we've got already, we had a meeting last night. It was remarkable. We already have over 100 signatures. And then we have a town hall that's coming up on February 26th. That is at 5 p.m. in the Academic Forum, room 201. And the idea is that, okay, this is our starting point.
Sure.
Now we're inviting people who've signed the petition and people who are interested in this to come to that meeting to help build on it, to revise it, reform it, right? And to build out this culture of talking about what it is that is possible and what is it that we want, and then how can we work together as a community in order to achieve that.
That's amazing. So if people can't come to the town hall on the 26th, how could they get in touch with you regarding that?
Best thing right now, they could go, we have a Facebook page set up, the Healthy Campus Bill of Rights. You can go to that. There's going to be a Facebook group that's going to be set up in connection with that. That's the best place to go right now because that's where the community is. We're going to be asking actually folks who can't make the town hall, who maybe are commuters or not on campus a whole lot, to give us your stories, right?
Sure.
Because building out from our stories is actually, I think, one of the strengths that we have as a community. There's, like I said, there's going to be a Facebook group that's going to be associated with that. We're also on Twitter. I think it's Healthy Campus BR or something like this. I'll have to give you that.
Sure.
I should have written that one down too as well. But we're going to have that. So right now, Facebook is our place to go. There's going to be information, contact information there about. We're going to have a launch of a web page. When right now, Facebook is where all our documents are. Everyone can check that out. And if you have more questions, you can post it right there in the messaging. We'll get right back to you.
Amazing. And so then just to sort of wrap it up, this is week 5 of the semester, and I always ask my guests for like their top tips for studying and living life as a college student. So as somebody who has experience as both a student and as a faculty member, what is sort of your advice to students in week 5?
Breathe. Breathe, and remember, best piece of advice I could give to anybody is that I know this is when stress starts really kicking up because midterms are coming up and assignments are coming out. The best thing you could do to be kind to yourself and remember that this moment in time is a blip in your life, right? So even if you stumble and fall on an assignment or have difficulty, be kind to yourself and know, okay, this is a moment and I could take that moment and I could learn from that moment and I could say, okay, that stunk, but we can move on for that. And then how do I kind of not return to that place in the future, right? I think that's the best thing that you can do at this point.
That's amazing. So if people want to get in touch with you personally, how can they do that?
You can touch with me by Mahoney at Kutztown.edu. You can get me on Twitter at Deep Democracy or The Raging Chicken at RC Press. And I'm also on Facebook, so feel free to message me there too as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with me, and thank you to everybody for listening to Emmy Knows. I'm your host, Emmeline Nolan, and in the studio with me today is Dr. Kevin Mahoney. I'll be back with you on KUR next week with more of the people who help make KU great.